Oh, hello. Okay, fine. Thank you. It is so different assembling on Zoom versus in person, but it's so interesting. I was thinking during Zazen that I've been sitting in my living room a lot today, and I just thought, oh, it's so interesting how it feels different knowing that you're all connecting. Like the space feels really different knowing that you're out there connecting with me. So thanks for coming into my home and practicing with me. So I'm a little even rusty on our forms. I'm assuming let's say the verse though, yes? Yeah, okay. All right. So please make a show. May the sacred presence of him who said he would abide in his teaching be our guide. May we follow his glorious example and tread with unfaltering step this noble path until we too shall attain enlightenment. All Buddhas throughout, can't remember we do the all Buddhas, I'm so rusty. Yes? All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, Maha, Prajna, Paramita. Okay, it still counts even if I stumble, right? And if you could make me co-host, because I would like to do a little screen sharing, I'm gonna try. And
Done.
Okay.
Co-host.
All right. All right. Again, welcome everybody to our first class on the Noble Eightfold Path. And I think I saw somewhere or someplace this might have been listed as a Dharma talk, but this is really a discussion. So less formal. And I was thinking, what distinguishes the two? I feel like there's probably a whole Dharma talk about that, but part of what distinguishes it, I feel like this is going to be a little more heavy on kind of information just going through. And also I'm going to do a little bit more reading than I would typically do in a Dharma talk. So that's where we're headed in terms of what kind of the format is. So tonight, this is meant to be an overview of the Noble Eightfold Path and how we actually practice with it. So to begin with, the Noble Eightfold Path is actually an expression of the fourth noble truth. So the fourth noble truth being the truth of path. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Four Noble Truths, but to refresh your memory, I think most folks are familiar, but the Four Noble Truths are the truth that suffering or dukkha exists, that the causes of dukkha, of suffering, are one expression of it is greed, hate, and delusion or craving. The third is that there's an end to suffering, or nirvana exists. And then that fourth noble truth is that the end of suffering is through practice, through path. So this is one, and it's often said the Noble Eightfold Path. So it really is this expression of that fourth noble truth. And I think it's really great that we are specifically diving into this particular expression of path. In our lineage tradition in Zen, we more typically work with it explicitly in terms of the 16 Bodhisattva precepts, which we study each year. As I can see, naturally, the question kind of arises, Eightfold Path, it's a fundamental teaching. Why haven't we been talking about this more frequently? And so this is one expression of it. So, so we'll be talking about this way of looking at how do we practice. And I'll be talking, so I'm going to give an overview. I'm going to talk about right view and a little bit about right understanding because they kind of intertwine and go together. And as I was preparing, one thing that I was recalling that Kyogen would reference in his talk sometimes is how practice or other things can be kind of viewed like there's so many different ways to slice a tomato. So there's one way where you slice it all in circles or in quarters or diced. And this is sort of like looking at the path of practice as one way to slice the tomato. And it can be really helpful to have these different perspectives. It's another way of viewing this path of transformation, of alignment, of how we can move in the world freely and align with our own deeper Buddha nature. So one way of looking at it can really be helpful to have that fresh perspective. Since this group, I'm looking at all of you, is most folks have studied the 16 Bodhisattva precepts pretty extensively. So part of will be interesting to see how that lands with all of you in terms of this different way of looking at it. So when I was thinking about what the big picture for this evening is and for our study of this, I invite you, as we're talking and discussing this, to hold the question about what do these practices mean for me? What questions come up that you would like to explore? Where would you perhaps like to apply more intention, more effort? What feels new and what feels really integrated? So what feels like, oh, it might be some different expression or emphasis. Can almost be like this feeling of recognition of, yes, I've explored that. Yes, there's more to do, but I've worked with that before. I have some practice background with that. So I just invite you to hold these practice questions as we talk about the Eightfold Path. So by way of introduction, I'd like to read just a couple paragraphs from The Heart of the Buddhist Teaching, and I know we've been through this book before, we definitely referred to it, but by Thich Nhat Hanh. So The Heart of the Buddhist Teaching by Thich Nhat Hanh, and he provides just a nice introduction, gives us some context from where this teaching comes from, and it's just about one page, like 3 paragraphs. So here's his introduction. When the Buddha was 80 years old and about to pass away, a young man named Subhadda came to see him. Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, thought it would be too exhausting for his master to see anyone. But the Buddha overheard Subhadda's request and said, Ananda, please invite him in. Even as he was dying, the Buddha was willing to give an interview. Subhadda asked, World-honored one, are the other religious teachers in Magadha and Koshala fully enlightened? The Buddha knew he had only a short time to live, and that answering such a question would be a waste of precious moments. When you have the opportunity to ask a teacher about the Dharma, ask a question that can change your life. The Buddha replied, Subhadda, it is not important whether they are fully enlightened. The question is whether you want to liberate yourself. If you do, practice the Noble Eightfold Path. Wherever the Noble Eightfold Path is practiced, joy, peace, and insight are there. The Buddha offered the Eightfold Path in his first Dharma talk, and he continued to teach the Eightfold Path for 45 years. And in his last Dharma talk, spoken to Subhadda, he offered the Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right thinking, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right diligence, right mindfulness, and right concentration. This noble path of 8 limbs suggests the interbeing nature of these 8 elements of the path. Each limb contains all the other 7. Please use your intelligence to apply the elements of the Noble Eightfold Path in your daily life. So the key components of, I think things I wanted to emphasize through reading this passage is that the Noble Eightfold Path is part of the Buddha's first and earliest teaching and the foundational teaching. And the Four Noble Truths are common to all traditions in Buddhism. So that really is the that foundation. And sometimes it's hard to stay a little oriented in all the lists that we've got going on in Buddhism in general. And one thing I just want to point out, we've got the Noble Eightfold Path, and then there's also a later expression of the 10 perfections or paramitas, and then the later developing path of practice as expressed in our tradition in Mahayana of the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. All right, so rearrange one little thing here. Okay. Are y'all with me so far? Okay. It's again, it's been a while since I've done a talk on Zoom. I'm used to more like feedback. So hi. Okay, it looks like you're all still with me. So the next thing I'm going to attempt to do, so okay, this is the stage. It's an ancient old teaching, trying to put it in context. I wanted to clarify some of the terminology that we come across. Okay, this is where I'm going to try to get fancy with the little slideshow. The first, just a couple terms that might be helpful to take a look at. The first one being noble. Oh, where's it? There we go. Share. Uh-oh. I can't tell if it's sharing the right screen or not. No. Nothing.
Nothing is shared so far.
Except me, right? Thank you, though. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Now I've lost all visual contact with all of you. Let's see. Hang on. Now I've got you. Thank you for bearing with me.
Yeah, there's usually a little green button somewhere.
Oh, yep, there. And blink. I think I got it. You seen the word noble?
Yes.
Were you expecting more from that visual given the buildup? So sorry about that. Anyway, I just wanted to clarify the use of the word noble, and I found this kind of interesting that it's, and I looked this up. So the use of the term Four Noble Truths or Noble Eightfold Path, it can be a little bit misleading of a translation of the Pali term. So because noble refers not to the truths themselves, this is a mouthful, not to the truths themselves, but to those who understand them. So the people that understand them, the practitioners that understand them, are noble. So a more accurate translation would be four truths for the spiritually noble. So I don't know when we achieve that lofty status, but it just is a little different twist. And the next thing is, the other thing I want to talk about is the use of the word right, because the whole list of the Noble Eightfold Path is right, right view, right understanding, right speech, all those things. So I'm just going to read this description from Rick Hanson, who wrote The Buddhist Brain. Each of the 8 elements of the path is described by a word that is typically translated as right or wise. Both meanings are used to reflect upon regarding your own suffering and your yearning for its end. Each element of the path is right in the sense of being correct, moral, and a pointed instruction about how to live. Each element is also wise in the sense of resulting from deep understanding and leading to good results. In keeping with the weight of tradition and the value of the sharp edge of the word, right was used in me as a summary, and I included that link. And then from Domyo in Zen Living, she comments that right means true, genuine, suitable, or appropriate. And uh-oh, did I just go away? I'm back. And that last one from Domyo about true, genuine, suitable, or appropriate was more, when I think of how past classes I've attended and study I've done on that, I think of right as more of aligned, true. It can imply this really black and white, like this for sure is the right way. And I think in this group of pretty seasoned practitioners, we know that it's not always that clear, but it's this aligned, wise action, wise speech, wise livelihood. All right. Okay, and then the next thing I wanted to point out is there can be a lot of confusion about how all of these get translated. So, a second here. So, I got in a horrible tangle. I'm not, are you seeing this? It looks like you are. No, you were not seeing it. Thank you. Just me. Hang on.
Now we see your slide.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience, folks. So right understanding, often the first in the list, is sometimes translated as right view. Thich Nhat Hanh translates it as right view. And the second one in the list, right view, is sometimes translated as right thought or right thinking. So there can be a lot of confusion between the first one and the second one. So yeah, I got in a tangle with that. I don't expect you to totally remember that, but if you're preparing one of these sections or you find yourself reading different commentaries or books or articles, it really does get kind of confusing about which one they are talking about. All right, so now I want to talk about really the path of practice and a little bit more specifically how we practice with these as a whole. So one way we can look at these is that the Eightfold Path is divided into each of the eight can fall under one of three different categories. So those three categories are wisdom, translated as prajna, morality or sila, and meditation, samadhi. So we have these wisdom, ethics, morality, and samadhi. And it can really be helpful to know how those how they fit together. So under wisdom comes right understanding and right view or right thought. I'm almost kind of abandoning my slides because it seems distracting. But let me just try this last one because it does kind of help to see it. I think I got it now. Okay. Give me a thumbs up, somebody, if you see it.
You can see it.
Okay. So I think it does help to see this. So here's the 8 divided into wisdom, right understanding, right view, morality, right action, right right speech, right livelihood, right effort, and then samadhi, meditation, right mindfulness, right meditation. And this division of morality, ethics, and wisdom really reflect the three major branches of our practice and how they come together. Oftentimes, what came to mind as I was looking at that is it doesn't fit exactly, but thinking about how altars are set up traditionally in the meditation hall, with the central main figure on the main altar as the wisdom figure, Manjushri or the Buddha, and then on the right-hand side, Kanzeon, compassion, and then oftentimes, this isn't how Dharma does it, but there would be Samantabhadra, which is the Bodhisattva activity. So you see how wise activity and compassion come together and is expressed in terms of wisdom. So that's just what came to mind for that. So that's one way of looking at the path of practice with these. Another way is to take them each individually, the 8, each individually as distinct and separate practices that could be taken one at a time. And oftentimes could be that there's one in particular that draws your attention for further investigation and further study. So pay attention to that if something strikes you in that way. And then the next way I want to talk about this, so talk about, the 3 divisions and then maybe individually, and then there's this path and progression of practice in the way that we can work with these. And I'm heavily drawing on the model of practice laid out by Kyogen in Zen Roots, which I hadn't looked at in a long time, but it's such a nice succinct. So just know that I'm drawing heavily on that. And he talks about how we start out with this, beginning with so the first of the 2 are right understanding and right view. I'm going to attempt to combine 2 things at once here. I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about right understanding and right view, and then go further into the path of practice with this. So the first of the Noble Eightfold Path is right understanding. And here, one thing that's really helpful to know is that this has a very specific meaning, in that it is talking about right or correct or aligned understanding specifically of the 4 noble truths. So coming into relationship with the truth of suffering, causes of suffering, end of suffering, and the path to do that. So the first step on the path is coming into deep relationship with our understanding, particularly of dukkha, of suffering, and not only as just not only as an intellectual understanding, but a really deep lived experience and relationship that I for myself, I found it just grows and changes over time. Seems like an endless practice coming into relationship with that. So that the first one is right understanding, and then the next one is right view. So, or this is where it gets a little tricky, right view or right thought. Both are the number 2 of the Noble Eightfold Path. And this has to do with seeing the world in a way that is beyond our own self-interest or our own small self view. It's seeing the nature of ourselves and all things from this more expansive view of not too interconnected. So having this view of things beyond our own small self, right view. And I think Chowan's going to talk more about this next week. I don't want to steal her thunder on this, but it bears repeating even if she repeats some of these ideas. But right thought or right view also includes motivation. So it means that we are coming into understanding that practice is not about something that we do specifically for ourselves to gain something, but it's about dropping the self and through dropping the self, being naturally motivated to act in the world in a wise way that is beneficial to all beings. So one description of this that I think is helpful comes from John Snelling from the Buddhist Handbook. I think I have it here. This one, if you, oops, it's all blurry. Sorry, never mind. But let me just read a little description about this right thought from Snelling. Right thought, on the other hand, must include correct motivation. We need to realize that we are practicing not to acquire greater powers and more possessions for ourselves, but rather to move away from the basic egocentric orientation to a new, wider, more selfless one. In short, there is in the final analysis no payoff for me, the small me, in practicing Buddhism. That having been said, it has to be admitted that none of us have perfect understanding and motivation at the start. As we continue, however, practice will tend to uncover all sorts of blind spots and subtle forms of self-centeredness. So that language can be a bit pointed, but it's pointing to, like I was saying at the earlier part, dropping the small self. So right thought and right view are all under the wisdom category. And Kyogen, in his description in Zen Roots, describes kind of starting on this path of practice this way. A couple of things I want to read from what he said. So right understanding means coming to an understanding of the meaning of dukkha, and dukkha translated as dissatisfaction or suffering, and that we need to do something to change ourselves. So there comes the motivation piece of things. And he also said about these first two of the Noble Eightfold Path, he says, the first of these two express faith. We begin religious training, putting one foot in front of the other in the dark on faith, because we know there is nothing else we can do. So it's really interesting to think about faith in practice, but part of it is this, and I'm guessing you'll recognize this feeling, this intuition that there is something to be done. There is something to turn towards. There is something that we can do and that we're drawn to understand more about. And the other part that comes with this faith is that as we are called upon, specifically in the teachings and in our practice, to explore and test out the teachings for ourselves. So verifying the truth and usefulness of these practices in our lives through our own lived experiences. So you kind of start out going like, I have this intuition that this will be helpful. And then over time, we really do see the fruits of that and what a difference it makes. So with this intuition, with this sense of faith and moving forward, that there is something to be done. Here's Kyogen's description of this path. I'm just going to read this because I think it's clearer. This leads us to the next three: right speech, right action, right livelihood. This is an expression of training within the precepts, making the mind of meditation manifest in daily life. And then the next part is the number 6, right effort, is a crucial one, for it means not backsliding. There comes a time in training when things have improved due to our efforts, but meditation and studying the precepts are no longer novel. At this point, it becomes easy, little by little, to lose the resolve to meditate and keep the precepts every day. Right effort is a reaffirmation of resolve and leads to right mindfulness. So here Kyogen's describing this right effort that's come first. We have right action and right speech, right livelihood, and then right effort as we've been on the path for a while. And then I'm going to continue with what he said. So now we have right effort, resolve, and then right mindfulness. So he says about that, right mindfulness develops as the teachings begin to permeate our very being. This is where the precepts begin to arise naturally as training and daily life become one thing. As this happens, the truth of Buddhist teachings become apparent right before our eyes. Right meditation is listed as the last step because this is where meditation and daily life are fully united. This is the point where breathing in and breathing out, we put the self aside to permit the Buddha way to flow freely. So that number 8, right mindfulness. And then there's one more paragraph to this. So he says, interestingly enough, the list does not stop here. Now we return to number 1 and number 2. Only this time, right understanding and right view or thoughts become an expression of wisdom arising from right meditation. All the other steps in the Eightfold Path can be seen in this light too, expressing the doing of a Buddha as a Buddha nature flows through our being in everyday life. So it just kind of comes back full circle. So that effort, that experience, testing out the teaching, and then we come right back to wisdom. And now, and it's informed in a different way through our experience and practice. Snelling from the Buddhist Handbook describes the same thing in a little bit different way. I'm just trying to give you a sense of like kind of this, like how it all builds on each other. It's this endless path of practice. So he says, he talks about it this way. He said, this gives the impression that every step must be approached in due sequence. But the 3 main elements of wisdom, morality, and meditation in practice need to be developed together. Without meditation, wisdom remains hollow and theoretical. At the same time, the insights that arise in meditation need the informed understanding of wisdom, or else they might not be recognized for what they are. See how this practice, all the elements of practice inform each other. So going back to the questions I suggested that you hold at the beginning, just going to remind you of those things I put out there for all of us to consider is, what does this path of practice mean for me, for you? What questions would I like to explore? Where would I like to apply more effort, more intention? What feels new and what feels integrated? What feels familiar? So we are at the very beginning of our exploration of the Eightfold Path, and this is just meant to be a bit of an introduction. And I'm going to leave it there for now and then open it up to just thoughts, commentary, discussion. I actually did have a little bit more because I thought I was doing the first 2, but Choan's doing that next week. So that will be something to look forward to. She's doing right thinking, right thoughts. Okay, thank you. And yes, I invite responses to this, and I'm kind of curious to know, especially since we typically work with this in terms of precepts, what, if anything, comes up there for folks.
What struck me was when you were talking about right effort and how at some point in practice we give up on making an effort. And that I really felt called out there. And it was really, that was a really good point.
Me too. That's the one that really hit me too. It's just like, wow, because this is a group of people that have been practicing for a while. And yeah, that's why it was like, oh, this is actually really great to be kind of looking at this path of practice and kind of looking at the precepts through kind of a different lens to keep it fresh, to keep us engaged. Yeah. Thanks for highlighting that, Dixie.
Shintai, thanks for introducing this for us. I think it's cool of Buddhism to have different sets of foundational teachings. I think essentially saying the same thing, but you know, the Eightfold Path will really resonate with some people. The 10 Perfections will be so helpful for some people. The Brahma Viharas also sort of point the same way, and of course the 16 Bodhisattva precepts, which we all know probably the best. So you know, they seem to all be telling us how to live in the world in different ways. So
Yeah, you bring up, I do love that about the teachings is like, we all come to practice through, I don't know, different experiences and different karmic entanglements. So it is really nice to have different expressions of how to work with those, because some stuff doesn't necessarily resonate, but others will. So there's, and they call it the Buddha the Great Physician, like lots of different prescriptions for our karmic ailments.
Shintai, thank you for reading the excerpts you did. That helped. The last Thich Nhat Hanh book I read, it was a few months ago. I just said to Beaverton Library, send me whatever you have, Thich Nhat Hanh. And so I can't remember the title, but he said the use of right isn't necessarily the opposite of wrong. It's just that it's one point of view. And so I'm trying to think when this was, early 2000s. I was shocked one day in the Oregonian, the regular weekday paper, they had these listed. I can't even remember the context. It was right at the top of the page. I thought, okay, life is good. I couldn't believe it. So, any rate, and I'm glad to hear actually with all the different types and historic ways of Buddhism coming to this time in our human history, that this is all shared. Somehow that's very reassuring to me. And if you could, I know we're at the end, the one term that always kind of, not puzzle, but I take a second look at is the right concentration. Because I thought, well, sitting really isn't concentration in a way. I mean, Zen is kind of a set format, but concentration could be a wider term for focus, because this is what you're choosing to do. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth Ann. You can't see the nods on the screen as you're talking, and I love that it was showing up in the Oregonian. You just never know where you're going to find the Dharma, right? And that term, right concentration, I'd be curious if others have a response to that. But it'll be interesting to take a deep dive into that, because it gets, again, that's where you also get into kind of translation issues and different emphasis. Because right concentration can point us to cultivating that like single-minded samadhi that can be so helpful. But there's also I'm looking to my left screen where the translation is right mindfulness, and that is to me feels like a more expansive moment by moment meeting, whatever is coming at me or to me. But anyway, I'm curious to know if anybody else has a reaction to right concentration or right mindfulness.
I really like the distinction that you just made between right concentration and right mindfulness. That makes a lot of sense to me. So, you know, different ways of training the mind that are valuable. You know, the training of focus is really valuable, as is how you described mindfulness. That was lovely. As a more expansive meeting, moment to moment, whatever we're presented with. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate the way you stated the motivation for Zazen. The motivation for Zazen is to drop the self. Everybody, it's quite a popular view to view it as a self-improvement program or whatever. You know, I'm going to get something out of this, but that was a good way to define the motivation. That was very helpful.
It can be so tricky because it's not that we, it's like we are working with our own suffering, but then through studying the precepts and really enacting them, we really do see that it's through, dropping our own kind of agenda or need or wanting or pushing against or being in opposition to whatever it is. When we can drop that, we really do reduce our own suffering, and then we also benefit others. But it's not immediately obvious that this is so. Yeah. It feels good to dive into this during this particular moment in history in our country, where we are in election season and such a contentious, divisive time, to be able to remember to drop my small self and my attachment to outcome, and at the same time working for good. You know, being active about it, be able to drop that attachment to it must be this way. I'm as guilty as anybody of like holding on to fixed views along those lines. So this is very timely to dive into this, especially now when it's just, you know, you turn on any news source. So and how nice to see all of you on my screen who are also engaging this. It is nice to not feel alone in that effort, for sure. Well, we have like 1 minute. Loosely speaking, I'm much of a stickler. Any final thoughts from anybody before I say the closing verse? All right, I'm looking at you all. I think we are complete. I'll make a show. Abiding in this ephemeral world, like a lotus in muddy water, the mind is pure as it goes beyond, thus we bow to Buddha. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, maha prajna. Well, feel free to unmute your microphone to say goodnight to one another, and thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Shintai. That was lovely.
Oh, Keiko,
Thank you.
Keiko, can you stay on? If I don't know if that works with Shintai's phone, or give me a call. There's
that's
something
okay.
I wanted
hop off.
to share with you.
I can hop off.
Oh yeah, no, you can listen too, Shintai. I just heard of this great author, and one of her books, I think it might be her later book, latest book, is The Tao of Equine. She's worked with horses. She's written 5 books on horses, And it's just so amazing because she quotes a lot of science, telling the reader that we are really polyvagal. And, so horses and other animals are so open to helping us heal. And I heard this whole hour interview. I was spellbound. Her first name's Linda. I think it's Kahana. And I didn't look it up. She said you could Google, and she has some little video where she worked with a horse that was deemed as, untamed, wild. And she said those animals that we call that, they haven't channeled their